Thank you. That was a very interesting presentation on Louis Leakey. Just give your report to me at the end of class. Okay, Daniel Acosta will be giving our final presentation of the day. Who will you be presenting on?
I'd like to present the famous anthropologist Margaret Mead to our class.
Excellent. Take it away.
Margaret Mead is well known as one of the world's most famous anthropologists. She brought cultural anthropology to the American public. She helped us to understand the importance of culture, and I think she's truly worth learning about. Margaret Mead was born in 1901 in Philadelphia, and she was the child of well-educated parents. Margaret didn't attend elementary school but was educated at home. For instance, her mother and grandmother would ask her to observe nature to learn about science or to record the behaviors of her sisters to learn about psychology. This early education set her on a path towards the social sciences. Later, she entered Barnard College and began studying psychology. She earned her PhD in anthropology from Columbia University in 1929. At Columbia University, Margaret met Frank Boas and Ruth Benedict, two very famous anthropologists. Dr. Boas and Dr. Benedict saw that Margaret was very intelligent and interested in anthropology, and they encouraged her to become an anthropologist too. During the early 1900s, there was an American and European idea that Western civilization was better than other civilizations. Many Western people believed that American or European culture was advanced and that other cultures were very basic, primitive, and immature. The other cultures weren't valued or respected by Westerners. Margaret Mead did not feel this way. She was a cultural relativist. That is, she believed that anthropology should be scientific and that anthropologists should observe cultures neutrally. That means anthropologists should study other people and other cultures without judgment, without the idea that they weren't as good as Western culture. Well, she believed that all cultures were valuable. Although it was unusual for young women in the 1920s to travel alone, Margaret convinced her professor, Frank Boas, to let her study cultures in the South Pacific islands of Pago Pago, Samoa, and Papua New Guinea. During her trips to these islands, she observed everything. She learned the language, took notes, and interviewed many people. This way of studying and describing a culture is called ethnography. Margaret Mead found the Samoan culture particularly interesting. She studied girls in Samoa and learned that the girls there had a less stressful life than American girls. In many ways, the Samoan girls had more freedom. She found that becoming a woman was different in Samoa than in the U.S. because the cultures had different ideas about what girls and women should be like. She found that culture affects and changes our personalities. Mead published a book in 1928 entitled Coming of Age in Samoa. Usually ethnographies like this are only read by other anthropologists, but Mead's book was a bestseller. She became very popular after this book was published. Mead became a professor of anthropology, and she also worked for many years in the American Museum of Natural History in New York City. She was the head of several important anthropology and science organizations, and she published over 20 books. She was very popular in her time and is still well known as an important anthropologist. After she died in 1978, President Carter awarded her the Presidential Medal of Freedom. One thing that makes me really like Margaret Mead is that she was very progressive. She was in favor of freedom and tolerance of all people. She supported civil rights and believed that humans could do really good things if they worked together. She thought that ideas of racism or war were cultural and that people could learn better ways to live. Most importantly, she strongly believed that modern Americans could learn from other cultures. And in 1928, she wrote, "As the traveler who has once been from home is wiser than he who has never left his own doorstep, So a knowledge of one other culture should sharpen our ability to scrutinize more steadily, to appreciate lovingly our own. Thank you.
Hi, I'd like to welcome all of you to the International Student Orientation at Norwalk College. I hope that your travels from your home country have been easy and that you are all settling in well. I believe I've met everyone, but just in case, I'm the Director for International Student Affairs, the person you can come to if you're having problems with your classes, your housing, visas, even if you just want someone to talk to. You're always welcome to stop by my office. We'll have several short workshops today, and we'll be talking about some common issues that international students face. The first one that I want to deal with is about communication, and in particular, nonverbal communication. Now, all of you have been studying English for some time. You have a good vocabulary, and you probably know all about verb tenses and modals and can ask directions and order from a menu. But communication is not only verbal. That is, talking is not the only language we use to communicate. Another way we communicate is through nonverbal communication, or body language. The term body language means the movements we use and the facial expressions we have, like smiling or frowning, the way we sit or stand, the way we touch or look at someone, the distance we stand from another person. Some psychologists say that more than 60% of our communication is actually done through body language. We do it without thinking or without ever having been specifically taught what the gestures or expressions mean. The problem is that body language is a little bit different in each culture, and this can often cause some problems with communication. Here's an example. In many places, it may be a little rude or disrespectful to look at another person directly in their eyes as you talk with them. So many international students will avoid this eye contact. But in America, we expect it. We think of eye contact as a sign of honesty and straightforwardness. American parents actually encourage their children to look people in the eye when speaking. Just imagine a conversation where an international student was trying to be respectful by not looking into the eyes of her American classmate. The American might wonder why her classmate wouldn't look directly at her, and the international classmate would be wondering why she was being stared at. The end result is an awkward and frustrating interaction. Oh, here's another one. Americans shake hands firmly when they greet each other because to Americans, a firm handshake signifies strength and power. But a soft or limp handshake is considered a sign of weakness. In some cultures, handshakes are less common, or a gentle, soft handshake is acceptable. So students need to know that when shaking hands, it's important to be firm. In America, a thumbs-up sign, a thumb raised in the air, is a sign of a good job. Also, a thumb and forefinger together with the other fingers straight means okay. Be careful, though. In other countries like Germany, Brazil, or Japan, this okay symbol can have other meanings. So be aware of who you're talking to when you use this gesture. Oh, here's another important one. In America, holding hands and kissing are reserved for people in love. In fact, Americans generally do not touch each other, and they like to keep distance between them and the person who they're speaking with. But there are many exceptions. For instance, friends, especially women, might hug when saying goodbye, and small children often hold hands. I'm going to hand out a list of some common examples of nonverbal communication that are specific to American culture. Now, I don't want you to panic. You don't need to know all of these examples of body language. It's more important just to be aware of differences in body language between cultures. If you're not sure what a gesture means, it's okay to ask. Oh, I forgot an important example of body language. If ever you're worried about your ability to communicate, there is one gesture that is the same in every country. Everywhere around the world, people use the smile to communicate pleasure and happiness. So smile as often as you want to, because it is an expression understood by everyone. Now, our next speaker is Molly Wilcox. She's the head of the ESL department, and she'll tell you about the ESL courses and the placement exam. Thank you very much for your attention.
By now you should be finished reading all of Shakespeare's play Romeo and Juliet. So today I want to review the play and focus on one of the characters, Juliet. I think that Juliet really makes this love story interesting, and I want to talk about why. A lot of people think of Shakespeare as an author who wrote novels that people read. But Shakespeare never actually wrote books. He wrote plays meant to be acted. So, as we look at Romeo and Juliet, I want you to imagine that the story is performed by actors, not read quietly to yourself. As you know, the story of Romeo and Juliet happens in Verona, Italy, and is a very old story. Two important families, the Montagues and the Capulets, are enemies. They're very angry with each other. Romeo Montague falls in love with Juliet Capulet. So, from the start, we know that this relationship is going to have some very big problems. And it does. Can anyone give me a quick summary of the story?
Well, Romeo and Juliet, they get married, secretly. And only Romeo and Juliet and their priest know about the wedding. After the wedding, Romeo gets in a fight and kills Juliet's cousin, and so he has to leave Verona. Then Juliet's parents tell her that she has to get married to another man, a guy named Paris. So the priest and Juliet make a plan.
And what is their plan?
Well, Juliet will pretend she's dead to avoid the wedding with Paris. But unfortunately, Romeo doesn't know that she's actually alive, and he rushes back to Verona. When Romeo sees Juliet's body and thinks she's really dead, he kills himself. Then Juliet wakes up, and when she sees Romeo's dead body, she kills herself too.
Good. Very good summary. Now, Romeo and Juliet is one of Shakespeare's earlier plays. It's really a favorite of many, many people. Both Romeo and Juliet are very well-developed characters. They have real emotions and personality. They come alive as we watch or read the play. So, let's take a closer look at Juliet. What did you think of her?
I really liked her. I was kind of surprised how strongly she loved Romeo. She went against her whole family so she could be with him.
Exactly. But notice that she doesn't start off as this strong young woman. Juliet changes in the story. When we first meet Juliet, she's a 13-year-old girl. She's quiet, and she usually does what her parents want her to do. At the beginning of the play, she's a good girl. She wants to please her family. But by the end of the play, Juliet moves from being this young girl to being an independent, mature young woman. Juliet's independence is almost shocking. For instance, she tells her parents that she will not marry Paris, the man they've chosen for her. She questions why Romeo must be an enemy to her family. Juliet even asks Romeo to marry her. All of this was very unusual for a girl in the 16th century. But Juliet knows who she loves. She's even willing to die for her love of Romeo. Here's another thing. Juliet grows more mature in the story. She knows the danger of her relationship with Romeo. For instance, Juliet tells Romeo to be careful when he is outside her balcony talking of love. Juliet also realizes that their relationship can never be happy. Several times in the play, she even refers to her own death. It is Juliet's growing maturity and independence that make her such an interesting character. She's changing, becoming stronger each day. Now, Romeo and Juliet is a tragic, horribly sad story. but it has some universal themes of love and youth. It's been produced many, many times for stage and cinema, and it's my opinion that the strong and beautiful Juliet is the character who makes this love story so popular. Now, can anyone tell me?
Today on The Natural World, we're profiling the naturalist Marjorie Courtney Latimer, who passed away on May 17, 2004 at the age of 97. Marjorie Courtney Latimer was the naturalist who discovered an extremely rare fish called the coelacanth in 1938 and introduced it to the scientific world. With us is Dr. Jennifer White, a biologist from New Haven, Connecticut. She's going to talk about Latimer's discovery. Welcome, Jennifer.
Thank you. Well, Ms. Courtney Latimer was a really wonderful woman, and she lived a long and interesting life. She was the curator of a small museum in the town of East London in South Africa, and during her life she collected many, many kinds of animals. But her discovery of a coelacanth was truly amazing.
Tell us what she found.
Well, the year was 1938. She had an agreement with a local fisherman that she could look through his catch, that is, the fish that he caught during the day, and if the fisherman caught anything interesting, she was allowed to take it for her museum. So one day she went down and she looked through the pile of fish and found nothing. Just as she was leaving, she saw an unusual-shaped, blue-colored fin poking out of the pile. She pushed away the rest of the fish and pulled this large blue fish out. Right away, she knew that this fish was different. She asked to take it back to her museum. Apparently, she had a hard time convincing a taxi driver to let her bring this 5-foot dead fish in the car.
Did Marjorie know what she had found? Did she realize how important her discovery was?
Well, she knew it was something special, but she didn't know what. When she got back to her lab, she couldn't find anything like it in her books. She wondered if it might be a coelacanth, but the idea seemed impossible. According to her books, the coelacanth no longer existed. They'd been extinct for 65 million years. She wrote to Dr. Smith, a professor interested in ichthyology, that's the study of fish, to see what he thought. She drew a little picture and described it as a 127-pound fish with thick scales and fins that looked like arms and legs. She wrote that there was no skeleton, but that there was a soft, oil-filled tube in its back.
What did the professor say?
He was very excited when he got the letter, and he came down to see the fish, and he decided that it was, in fact, a coelacanth. He named it Latimeria columni after Marjorie Latimer, and columni because that was the name of the river near where it was found.
Tell us what a coelacanth is and why it might be important.
Well, coelacanth fossils are dated to as much as 400 million years ago. So coelacanth are even older than the dinosaurs. They seem to have disappeared around the same time as dinosaurs, about 65 million years ago. It's just incredible that an animal assumed to be long gone could actually still be living. The coelacanth is a very strange fish, though. It's got some things that are quite different from modern fish. For instance, it has a jelly-filled organ called a rostral organ. This is the only living creature with this organ. It also has an incredibly small brain, smaller than any other animal we know of. I suppose the small brain size hasn't hurt the fish, since the coelacanth has clearly survived for millions of years.
So do coelacanths only live off the coast of Africa?
Well, we thought so until not too long ago. In 1998, an American couple was on their honeymoon in Indonesia when they found a coelacanth at a fish market there. Instead of the blue color, as the fish around Africa were, this fish was brownish gold colored. Again, it was an amazing discovery. Scientists offered a small reward for coelacanth and asked to be notified if a fisherman ever caught one. 10 months later, they were told of a coelacanth that was actually still alive. They had a chance to swim next to it before it died.
Incredible. Thank you so much for sharing this story of an amazing fish and the woman who first discovered it. I want to let our listeners know that there are now organizations to help save the coelacanth from being killed by fishermen. Instead of finding new coelacanths for research, we are trying to preserve the ones that are alive.
Hi, are you busy?
No, I just finished watching this really interesting documentary on TV about a guy named Clive Wearing. He's a man from England with terrible amnesia.
You mean he forgets things?
Right, he lost his memory. He had encephalitis, this virus that destroyed the part of his brain that controls memory. It happened over 20 years ago. Since then, he can't remember anything further back than about 7 seconds.
Really? He can only remember things for 7 seconds? Does he know his name?
Yeah, he knows his name and he knows who his wife, Deborah, is. I think he knows that he has kids from his first marriage, but he doesn't recognize them or know their names. He lives at a center for people with brain injuries. It was really amazing, though. He has signs around his room reminding him where he is. And he can't really leave the center because he might get lost or hurt. He has to have someone to care for him all the time.
That's so strange. And it's so sad, too. Does he know what happened to him?
Kind of. He knows that he was sick, but to him, since his memory pretty much erases every 7 seconds, every moment feels like his first moment following the illness. So, he wakes up in the morning and is excited to be alive. He writes in his journal, 7:30, I'm awake for the first time. Then a few minutes later, he has forgotten his previous waking and now has a new feeling of being awake. So he crosses out the earlier sentence and writes something like, 7:38, hooray, I'm really awake now. And then he'll cross that out and write 7:45, now is when I'm truly awake, and over and over. In this program, he saw the cameraman and the producer and said, you're the first people I've seen in 20 years. And then his wife came in and he was excited because he thought he hadn't seen her in 20 years either. They hugged and kissed as if it was a 20-year reunion. But really, she'd been there just a few minutes before.
Wow, that's crazy. I can't even imagine what that must be like for her.
Well, she was only in her 20s when he got sick. They'd just been married for around a year. I would have thought that she'd leave him, but actually, they're still very close.
That's amazing that they're still together. I don't know if I'd be able to do that.
I think she spent a lot of time with him for the first 10 years or so. She organized charities and tried to get good treatment for him. Once she got him into the new center, she decided she had to move on. She moved to the U.S. and got divorced from him. I think she dated other people, but she was never able to get Clive out of her head. I guess she finally accepted how much she loves him and how she can't be with him and can't be away from him either. She moved back to England. A few years ago, they got married again. Now she visits him all the time. He always asks when she's coming and asks her to please get here at dawn. Get here at the speed of light. They're still so in love.
Oh, that's so sweet. But what about his kids? How do they deal with their father?
Well, his kids are adults now. They said that it's hard to visit him. He enjoys their company when they visit, but he can't actually remember who they are. And, of course, he doesn't remember that they ever came, so in a way it doesn't matter much whether or not they do visit.
Wow. What does he do all day?
Well, he doesn't read books because he has trouble remembering the sentence before. It's the same with television programs or movies. He can't follow a storyline. But he does like to watch sports since he can enjoy it without remembering the previous events. One other really interesting thing, he was a brilliant musician before he got sick. Amazingly, after the encephalitis destroyed his memory, he still had his musical skills. Well, for some reason, he can still play the piano. He spends a lot of his day at the piano. It's actually music that gives him a lot of comfort and satisfaction in his life.
That's an amazing story. I hope I can see the program sometime.